All right, it looks like we should be live, and if anyone attending the webinar can confirm for us that we are live, go ahead and let us know in the chat section. Let us know if you can see us, if you can hear us. That would be helpful. Let us know in the chat section. Let us know if you can see us, if you can hear us. There we go. I see the answers rolling in. Okay, very good. So we're going to go ahead and start now. We have a great crowd here. First, I want to say thank you to everyone who's in attendance today. This is fantastic. Everyone's taking their Friday and getting some education and putting in the time. And it's kind of like grinding outside of the weight room. You know, it's grinding in the educational aspect of the field. So thank you, everyone, for being here. I also want to thank our presenter today. That's Rick Howard. He's taken time out of his day and also coming on here to share his knowledge and experience. And Rick was introduced to me by Craig Stevens, who's at Westchester as well. And that, if anyone's familiar with Westchester, they've kind of forged a reputation on the East Coast for fantastic strength and conditioning coaches. And I'm really excited to hear what he has to say today. Items here. I want to recognize the partners who are putting on this webinar, which would be TeamBuildr and Strength Performance Network. This is the first of what we hope will be many webinars, so we'll have more to come here. And the goal is to start providing some more packaged formal content to coaches in the strength community, educational content. Strength Performance Network, I don't think anyone here does not know who Strength Performance Network is. SP Network has been the first social network devoted exclusively to strength coaches, but right now is the premier social network dedicated to strength coaches. And they're known for providing a variety of type of content, notably the job postings and the videos that originate from strength coaches at their programs. So big thanks to Strength Performance Network for putting on this webinar. Technically, they are the backbone of this operation, and big thanks to them for doing that. The other partner is TeamBuildr. And this is not the first collaboration between TeamBuildr and Strength Performance Network, but it is the first webinar together. TeamBuildr is online strength and conditioning software for strength coaches. It's a way to streamline the management and logistics of running a strength and conditioning program, and we certainly love being a part of the strength and conditioning industry and love taking part in this as well. So with that said, we're going to move on here and start our presentation. Again, today's presenter is Rick Howard of the NSCA. Rick is also entrenched in strength and conditioning academia, which is a growing field. And this is on long-term athletic development. And I'll just go one more minute here before turning over to Rick. I thought that Rick and this topic would be a fantastic presentation because it's been spoken about in strength and conditioning recently. I think that in S&C it's very easy to get caught up in the day-to-day of the job role, which is fairly obvious considering that we're working on improving our athletes one day at a time. But it's also important to step back and get some sort of larger perspective on how we approach our athletes and how we approach the field of sports and strength. And that's probably something we could, lose sight of, and this will be good to get us going on a philosophical level about what we're actually doing here outside of the day-to-day. So, Rick, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you, and thanks.
Hey, Hugh, thank you, and thank you for how you set that all up for us for the presentation, because you're absolutely right, and a lot of times we think that long-term athletic development means how do we peak by Friday, and that's not really what this is about. It really is that global overall approach that we're going to try to take a look at here to help coaches understand why long-term athletic development is actually gaining so much in the trenches, and coaches are really starting to look at it. Not just in the U.S., but a lot of this actually started in Canada. They had a lot of work done up there with Istvan Balje. He put together probably that first long-term athletic development model that most of us will look at and refer to. There have been a lot of models that have been adapted from that internationally. So it's not that this is just something that's recently come up in the U.S. and we're starting to pay attention to it, but there are a lot of factors that I think we have to go back and really look at to be able to put this together. So I think we'll get on with the presentation. We'll go through those factors as we get to each of the slides. How's that sound?
That sounds good. But first, you owe us a little bit more about yourself. If we hit the next slide here, you're going to have to give us a little bit of background on yourself here, just so we really know who you are.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so this is a little bit more about me. Yes, I am an adjunct instructor here at Westchester University, which I thoroughly enjoy. I also do some teaching at Rowan University and at the Kaler Academy, which is up in Iceland, and they have a similar Thrive for Knowledge as we do here, and how to actually do better as a strength coach, personal trainer, whatever realm it is, when we're working with athletes or we're working with clients who may become athletes. And so that I think it's an important distinction to make, that we're all kind of on the same team helping people get better, no matter what level they are and where they're coming to us from. So this kind of gives a little list of all my background experiences, but a lot of times I know in the coaching world, they're like, all right, what did you coach? You know, are you out there in that day-to-day grind like we are? Or are you just one of those academics who's kind of sitting over there in your ivory office right now trying to tell us what to do without having ever been in the field? And I think we're seeing a lot more in our field right now, that there are a lot more coaches who are paying attention to the science, who may even be involved in the science, and a lot more scientists who are actually getting their hands into the coaching, because you do get a better understanding from each of those two worlds. So I currently train kids between the ages of 8 and 88, I would say. However, most of my clientele actually are kids in the elementary, middle, and high school level. So I do get some college athletes that I train, especially when they're home from break from their university. I was actually part of, when I worked for the School District of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania a number of years ago as the Director of Athletics, I was responsible for the strength and conditioning programs of all the schools in the system. So that gave me the opportunity to go visit, see what was going on in each school. There was a school right near where I was when I was coming up, and I'd actually helped them to create their strength and conditioning program in the high school. So I've actually been there. I've actually done it at the high school level, at the middle school level, and then through working in physical education and in athletics, I was able to do it from a coaching side, a teaching side, and an administrative side. So now I'm excited that I'm also adding the scientific, scholarly side to the equation, and we're all saying the same thing. We just might be saying it in a slightly different way. So that's really my background. I've done a lot of different things. I've been around for a long time, as you can see. But I'm probably most proud of the work we've been able to do within the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So certainly want to recognize them. They're the ones who just came out. Hopefully most of you have seen it. We just completed a position statement on long-term athletic development, which was published ahead of print a couple of weeks ago. It actually has, along with it, if you go to YLM Sports Science, they actually did an infographic on the 10 pillars. We'll talk about the 10 pillars in the presentation, but there's a lot of information coming internationally about what to do for long-term athletic development. So we'll skip ahead to the next slide here, and we'll get things on the road here a little bit. There it is. All right, so this is an overview, and there's a lot of criticism, actually, and some of you may have heard that about long-term athletic development, that there really is no evidence for it. Like, why would we use a system for which there's no evidence? And the answer that most of us will come up with at this point in time is, out in the coaching realm, we know that the more time and effort we're able to give to our athletes, the better they become. The more positive experiences we provide for them, the more likely they are to get it. We also know that not every athlete develops at the same exact rate, so we have to be very cognizant of that in our coaching development as we go through that process with the kids. The other side of it, though, is we know it's not working. We know that specializing kids at 8, 9, 10 years old is not actually helping us. If you go back and you look at a lot of the data and the statistics, it will tell you that that's probably not the best way to go for long-term success in athletics. So as Hugh had said earlier, when you go back and you look at that long-term approach, what are we really trying to do? And we're really trying to get all of our athletes not only to do well now, but really the big picture for this is that they're healthy citizens, healthy contributors to a society, and they're able to continue to be physically active throughout their whole lives. So we're not trying to sacrifice them on the field one day just for one particular play or victory, but rather to build them up as people. And I think as a coach, that's one of the proudest moments we have, is when our student athletes come back to us after they've left athletics per se, or even at a higher level of athletics, and we're able to say that we were able to contribute to that because we helped them along their growth and development continuum, rather than sacrificing them for the short-term goal. So when we look at a long-term approach, that's exactly what we're talking about. What is the long term? And I think it's probably a good time to talk about this, even before we move on a little bit. What do we mean by long-term athletic development? What is long-term, and what is athletic, and what is development? And for long-term, I think if you're a high school coach, for example, it's more than just being grades 9 through 12. If you're a U16 coach, it's not just those kids that you have at ages 15 and 16. It's really that whole long-term process, and a lot of us are now looking at this, and if you look at some of the models that are out there, and if anybody's interested in more information, I'm sure we could share some of that afterwards with the models that are available, but they have a continuum at the end of long-term athletic development, which you shouldn't say it's the end, but it's the stage. It's usually the 5th stage or the active for life stage, where it's going throughout a lifetime and you're actually giving back to the sport, either as a coach, an official, or someone who's a representative of that particular sport. So long-term doesn't stop at the youth level, it doesn't stop at the high school level, the college level, or even the pro level. The whole notion is that this isn't a process that you'll be able to take forever, and for those who have seen athletes who might not get to that next level, it's certainly not the expectation that if you play high school ball and you don't get to play in college, that you're not active anymore. It's very important to make sure that all of these people continue to be active on whatever level they can be. So that's an important thing to look at as we go through this. Tom Ferry, I think, at the Aspen Institute, has really taken a look at what we define athletes as, because there are some realms, and sometimes even within, and depending where you're coming from, what nation it is, nationally and internationally, there has been some discrepancy even within the physical education and physical activity realm that we really don't want to, and unfortunately they use the term deal with athletes. And we're all athletes at some level, and we go back to the basic tenets of physical literacy upon which a lot of physical education standards are built. It all comes from physical literacy. So if you're not really familiar with physical literacy, what we're trying to do is to get everybody to be able to master fundamental movement skills. We'll talk a little bit more about those in a couple minutes. Fundamental sports skills. So that everybody has within their own toolbox all of these skills that empower you, no matter what level you are, to actually be able to read your environment, to make the appropriate decisions when you're on the field of play, or even if you're being physically active, so that you can move confidently and you can move under control in a wide range of physical activities or sports. So it's what you call it as a coach, it's field sense. So in order to develop field sense, you need to develop physical literacy. In order to be better at one sport, you need to be engaged in other sports. So you get all of that experience to understand where you are now and how to get to that next level. So it's important for us to take a look at that. So we'll move on to the next slide to give you a little bit of an idea more about what we're actually going to learn here in the next several minutes. Okay, so what you're going to learn is a little bit about what do we mean about athleticism. We talked about long-term a little bit. We need to discuss athleticism a little bit more to get a better idea of exactly what we mean about that. And of the common definition that's now being accepted, because we really do want to engage everybody, no matter what their level is. We want to engage them in the process. So athlete would be defined as wherever that person is at that particular period of time. So anybody who's physically active, the real encouragement is to get people up and moving and doing something. So there are other definitions that are out there. The American Academy of Pediatrics had an excellent one going back to about, I think, 2001, talking about if you are actually athletic, you have certain physical, social, psychological types of benefits that you can actually state, and you're able to look at it and be able to tell people that, yes, I know that I'm actually athletic because I have the proper biological development for the level I'm playing, the proper social development for the level I'm playing, the proper psychological, physiological, all of those domains are correctly addressed. And sometimes I think that's forgotten in sports when we look at what happens to some of our athletes. We try to either play up or play down. They might not have that level of athleticism is defined here with all of those different domains. So it's important that we're not just looking at the physical domain. There are other factors that really tell us whether or not that athlete is ready for either the next level or to be held back to another level. Most of us could recognize athleticism if somebody asked us to describe it. We know it's something that's got to be demonstrated. It goes across particular sports. You can be athletic in one sport, but to be defined as being someone who's athletic or has athleticism, it's can you actually demonstrate those skills across different domains and different sports. And within the Canadian system, they've kind of gone and defined athleticism almost within physical literacy. So do you have those specific sports to be competent and physically able to compete? So when we're looking at athlete, there are all different ways of looking at it, but I think that we need to figure out, especially with so much of what we know now within long-term athletic development, we have some kids, because growth is nonlinear, we'll have kids who might develop early. So they might be able to demonstrate athleticism when they're in elementary school at ages 8, 9, 10, and 11. There are other kids who develop a little later. So we have to make sure we provide those opportunities for those kids so that they might not look like they're athletic until perhaps even when they're in high school. I was a classic example of a late bloomer. I actually didn't hit my peak height velocity, and I hate to say this out loud, I'll tell you all the story. I didn't hit peak height velocity until I went to college. I was 17 when I went to college, and that's when I actually hit my peak height velocity. So I can feel for the late bloomers, the kids who kind of came up and took a little bit longer to develop. Some of my friends were those early maturers who were really doing a great job, 10, 11, 12 years old. Unfortunately, that can lead to burnout for those kids because those are the ones the coach can easily identify as being those athletes at that point in time, so they get all the playing time. But what ends up happening, either through repetitive injuries, the pressure to play, or just only playing one sport without being able to have a well-rounded, physically literate person, kids will end up burning out from sports, and the evidence suggests that 70% of kids burn out of sports or no longer play sports by the time they turn 13. So that's a pretty sobering statistic to look at, that when we're really trying to encourage more people to be athletic, we're actually moving in the wrong direction with specialization and getting kids to actually be less athletic by not even participating in the particular sport. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one a little bit, the next slide, and we'll start talking about that a little bit. So one of the important things that we talk about here, and I'm a big proponent of fundamental motor skills, and I think it's very important for us to be able to focus on fundamental motor skills and muscle strength in order to be able to go where they are. Depending on the source you look at, there are a wide variety of fundamental motor skills. So generally speaking, they come from 3 categories. The list that I usually work from has 22, but you can see in other lists there might be some more, there might be some less, but generally they come from 3 categories. The 3 categories are body management, so those will be different things like bending, stretching, being able to stop, being able to roll, twist, land. All of those things are critically important in sports for our kids. Can they actually manage their body? There are 2 ways we look at body management too. The first way is, can you maintain and control your body movement? So could you stretch? Could you shake? Could you spin? Could you shrug? That type of a movement. The other way we look at it is actually, can you shift body parts to alter your balance? Dynamic and static balance are both parts of being able to have good body management. So can you spin, can you roll, can you twist, can you dodge? All of these different types of motion are involved in that particular category. So these are important skills for all of our kids to learn, and looking at it, most of our kids should learn these skills in what we refer to in the U.S. as elementary school, but generally by the time you turn around age 10. Of course, there's huge variation in these numbers, because we look at everything from a chronological age, which is how many years in age a youth is. So it's easy for us to look at that. We know if somebody's 10 when they're 10. But we really have to look at it from a variety of factors, because biologically, in terms of their actual maturation and development, there's usually a 2-year window on either side of that age. So that means if you're working with a group of 10-year-olds, you're really working with a group of 8 to 12-year-olds. Even within that age. So now if all of a sudden you're working in a middle school environment and you have students who might be 12, 13, 14, or 12 to 15, now all of a sudden you have a group of students who really are between 11 and 17 years old in a maturational process. So it becomes increasingly difficult to be able to put this together. And because kids today have fewer opportunities than many of us had growing up in terms of going out and playing, whether it was structured play, unstructured play, or actual part of a sports team, a lot of kids aren't getting that same level of fundamental motor skill development in these skills, so they're already deficient when they come to us as coaches for us to be able to get them to their next level. The student athletes that I work with, for the most part, I'm spending a lot of my time actually breaking back down their fundamental motor skills in each of these categories, and then I start adding them back together. Because if you look at it from a sports context, when we're looking at physical literacy, it really is the fundamental motor skills and the sports skills. And sports skills are really just combinations of fundamental motor skills. Because the category of fundamental motor skills of which we're the most familiar would be the locomotor skills. Those are the ones most of us think about when we talk about fundamental motor skills. Locomotor skills means exactly that. You're transporting your body from one place to another. So examples of that might be things like climbing, running, skipping, shuffling, jumping, a lot of things, change of direction, hops, all the different things that you think about when you're doing training of your athletes. So can they do these skills by themselves before you start combining them with other skills and drills? And you'll see from your student athletes, if you go back and evaluate them that way, what can they do all by themselves before they go doing it that way. We usually use the example of U8 soccer, and most of us will usually chuckle when we think about it because it's known basically as swarm ball, because at that age most kids have not developed the ability to run and kick. Some can run, some can kick, but most cannot run and kick. So those 2 or 3 kids who are 8 years old who have learned those 2 skills, they control the game. Everybody else swarms around those kids around the ball. So we're really working on getting everybody to learn all of these skills at a progressive rate. We all develop differently. It's going to take a different period of time for all of us to get there, so we have to be aware of that. The third category of motor skills that really is often ignored outside of the coaching realm is object control. So object control would be the ability to either send, receive, or travel with an object. So can you kick something, roll something, throw something? Can you catch it? Can you stop it? Can you trap it? And then to travel with it, can you dribble with your feet, with your hands, or with a stick? So these are a lot of the different types of drills that we try to put together for our athletes. But we really need to go back, and I think part of the assessment that we do, which is one of our 10 pillars, when we're assessing athletes at any given point in time, where are they in terms of their athleticism? Where are their fundamental motor skills? Where are they physically, so that we know where we need to go next? Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide, I think, a little bit here. We're going to continue to talk about a lot of these terms. We've already talked about physical literacy a little bit. The role of the coach in these, as we're talking about this, is we really want you to understand that just because an athlete is not getting a particular skill or a particular task does not necessarily mean that he or she is not athletic. He or she may not have actually ever learned any of these skills. So if they're not getting taught these skills either from a previous coach or in their physical education program or at home, there's a thing within the motor skills world that talks about that it's age related but not age determined. And that means that just because you turn 10, most 10-year-olds can skip rope, but it doesn't mean that just because you're 10 you can skip rope. So just because you hit a certain age, it doesn't mean you can do the things that we as coaches might think that they can do. We really have to go back and see, did anybody actually teach them? Or if they were taught, were they actually taught correctly? Because it's one of the biggest things I see with the athletes that I work with. I actually taught physical education for a number of years as well. And when I was teaching PE, a lot of the kids who went to after-school sports groups would actually come back to physical education having not learned to hold it back correctly, for example. So there's no way that they could have an object control with a bat of hitting a ball. They hadn't learned how to do it properly. So we had to go back and reteach that particular motor skill in order for them to apply it as a sports skill. So it's important for us to coaches to not make any of these assumptions about what kids know and don't know and whether they actually have the skills or the ability to do it. We really need to take a look at this from that whole perspective. The other side of it that I always like talking about is that positive youth development perspective that I think is very, very big, but is often ignored in our field, and it's one of the criticisms of an LTAD model. Most long-term athletic development models are focused on the physical aspect of our development. But if we look at the development of youth specifically, we need to look at not just the physical, because when we went back to our definition of athleticism, we have to look at their social, psychological, biological development as well. So I did a lot of work in after-school programming, especially when I worked with the school district, because we were in charge of not just the high school athletics, but the middle school athletics, middle grades. So anybody who played a sport in grades 6 through 12 was under our domain. So we were able to establish a lot of different things for them, and there's an organization known as the Search Institute. They came up with a list of 40 developmental assets, and I think these developmental assets are critically important within a long-term athletic development model. We'll talk in a couple minutes about a couple models that have come up that include some of these. So within developmental assets, that means, are we really helping to shape our kids physically, mentally, socially, etc.? So within these developmental assets, it's a nice list. There are 40 of them. You could actually go download them. They're free, and a little checklist for each age that you're working with to see how they're moving along. There are 20 external assets, and there are 20 internal assets. The external assets really focus on how you're actually doing with support. So are you getting support from your family, from the neighborhood, from your school climate, etc.? Then you're looking at empowerment. So it recommends that kids participate in community service, make sure that they're safe at home and in school. And you know, working in Philadelphia, I could tell you lots of different stories about how kids really aren't safe at home. In Wilmington, Delaware, where I live now, I taught there as well. So some of the kids don't have some of those basic needs. If you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they don't have their basic needs met, and yet we're asking them to excel in a lot of these different sports and activities, and that's not always an easy task. So we really do have to factor in a lot of these different things to be able to make this work. So one of the things we want to be sure to do is to look at all sides of development of our kids as they're coming through to make sure that this is happening. So from the internal side, this is the responsibility of the kids as athletes. What can they actually do? Are they committed to learning? Do they actually have achievement motivation? So that's when it gets into when we're talking about here, when we're saying, are we really setting up positivity? Are we really creating a positive environment for our kids to learn? Kids usually like to define fun, and we all know the literature that suggests that kids participate in sport. The number one reason that they play sports is they want to have fun. Fun has been defined, and I don't know the exact reference, but it's a combination of success and challenge. If a kid is overly successful, they're not going to be happy. And if we're just giving them a medal because they're there, they look right, they see right through that. If, however, they're not challenged, they're not having fun either. Or if they're overly challenged, it's a delicate balance that we as coaches need to recognize. How do we make it more successful and more challenging, but appropriately so? Part of that fun, actually, from a sports perspective, is how many positive offensive opportunities to score do we have? So when you're thinking about different practice setups, and there's a lot of literature available on this as well, that the short-sighted game concept, having more offensive than defensive players in certain times and in different positions to be able to show how that works, gets kids engaged in the process. The other side of that from an internal perspective is actually that, is engaging kids in the process. When I coach middle school athletics, for example, I'd always have kids involved in setting up the warm-up that they would do for the day, so they start to learn what an appropriate warm-up is for that particular sport. The different things that we need to practice, what do they feel that they were good at, what do they feel that they needed to work on. By that age, kids definitely have that recognition. Younger kids, not so much so. As long as you're telling them they're doing a good job, they'll keep working at it, they'll keep trying to do a good job. As kids get older, they compare themselves to their peers, they know exactly where they are in that playing field, and you can work with them from that level. So I think it's important that we look at the internal and the external aspects as well, because one of the other internal aspects is positive identity. So do they actually have self-esteem? Do they have a positive vision for their future? We as coaches probably have a huge area within what we do to create that. And the positive self-esteem and motor skill competence actually are two of the key factors that contribute to lifelong physical activity participation. So not only are we going a long way for their physical health, we're actually helping them with mental, social, and psychological health as well by actively engaging them in the process. And that's why we really think LTAD is huge, not just for the physical part, certainly for the physical part, but it goes beyond that playground to podium notion. There are certain organizations that put that together, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We do also have to think of our elite athletes, and we do have to create some type of a system for them. So these models have come into play so that we can create a system for those particular athletes to get to that next level. There's nothing wrong with that at all, but we also have to consider that some of our athletes aren't right at that level, and how do we encourage them to participate in the process? Some of them might get all the way to the high school level, as we would say in the U.S. Outside the U.S., that particular level would just be a club level, usually like a U18 program. So LTAD models aren't usually broken out according to the American system of being a school-based program, so it's not like the elementary, middle, and high school levels. It's usually, like if you look at the Canadian model, they go from 0 to 6, then 6 to 8 or 9, 9 to 11 or 12, then they go to 12 to 15 or 16, 15 to 16 on up to 21, and then a little older than that is their final model. The USOC actually has a model called the American Development Model, so you probably want to take a look at that too. That actually does a little bit better, I think, in terms of the overlapping chronological ages, because as we said, biologically, you can be a couple years on either side. So their model in the first stage is actually ages 0 to 12. So that's really where we should be giving our kids all the opportunities to discover everything about playing different sports, learning how to play sports, etc. And then by the time you hit somewhere between 10 and 16, so there's a window on either side of that, then you can start developing and really practicing more. Then between 13 and 19, then you could be doing what the other model refers to as train to compete. Relatively same ages, just a little wider range for that to do it. And then at age 15 and plus, which actually is very in line with the research on when you can actually start specializing in a sport, Most of the data says if when kids reach about the ages of 15, they have the social and psychological skills as well as the physical skills to make that determination on their own in which sport they should specialize. So this model at ages 15 plus, you could either go the acceleration track, so you're going to excel in sport, or you could go into the continue to participate but be successful in sport model. And you never know from that age range, and using myself as that example again, I really didn't come into being until later in high school, actually early college. So if I were not allowed to be in either of those paths at 15 plus, I would have lost out. And a lot of kids are the same way. So we still need to make sure, even at that level between 15 and 19, that we're giving kids every opportunity to participate to be able to do that. So that's just an example of a couple different models, how they have that set up to be able to figure that out so we can get to do all of that stuff. So there's something known as positive coaching. You might have seen it even in the world of education, where you're trying to get your kids to develop that positive mindset. Unfortunately, a lot of the way coaches look at training our athletes, you don't want to make that mistake. There's always been that penalty for making a mistake. Unfortunately, that penalty has often been at the expense of the very thing that we're trying to promote, which is lifetime physical activity and exercise. So what do coaches always do? All right, you messed up that play, go run a lap. So now the student athlete has actually learned, all right, I messed up, I should never do that again, and if I mess up, they're going to take away exercise, so exercise is now a punishment, not a privilege. So you're actually sending two negative messages at the same time. With a positive mindset, you're setting kids up to be able to look through different types of situations to make it work. So a lot of times, and there's a good group out in California that does a lot of work with this, the Positive Coaching Alliance, and they talk about things like a compliment sandwich and say, all right, you did a really nice job hustling to the ball. However, you overran the ball and missed it completely. Why do you think that happened? And then you engage your student athlete in the process of helping us to understand why it happened, what they could do better, and then the next part that's often forgotten, go back right now and do it. You can't say, all right, that's fine, we'll remember next time. Because what happens next time, we have that motor pattern now of running past the ball. So unless we change that right away and get kids engaged and go, all right, here's what I needed to do, here's how it works. And we all see those cartoons of the team kind of just standing there, and the coach is like, well, what's the matter? And he goes, well, this isn't the way we practiced it. So you have to go through all of those different situations so kids get a better understanding of where they need to be able to figure all of that stuff out. Okay, so that's an important part we want to take a look at too. So we'll move on to the pillars of athletic development slide so we can take a look at what that actually looks like to help us along. This is kind of a summary of the position statement that the NSCA just released recently, and it's going to be something I think that we'll be taking a look at. It fits in very nicely with the available models that are out there. So I think it's important to look at. We're not trying to have everybody have competing models of long-term athletic development. Really what we're trying to do is figure out what works best in each particular environment. For this position statement, all of the research that was out there on all of the different models was looked at to see what seems to work, what has a good level of evidence, what might not have as good a level of evidence yet. Came up with 10 pillars that we found actually were very helpful in terms of figuring out exactly what we need to be able to do. So the first pillar goes back to motor learning and to youth growth and development. That is that every program should be individualized. Not every kid is at the same level at the same time. So we have to factor that in, and then also recognize that growth and development is not linear. So just because you continue to get older does not necessarily mean you get better every year, and we really have to be careful for that period of time we refer to as adolescent awkwardness, or as most people refer to it as your first growth spurt. Now all of a sudden your arms are longer, your legs are longer, and coach gives you the ball and you go to throw it and you look like you've never thrown before. And the coach says, well, what happened to you? And you're like, I don't know. You're an adolescent, all of a sudden you just can't throw the ball so well. So it's important for us as coaches, when we recognize that our athletes are going through that particular phase, we have to almost go back and reteach motor skills to make sure that now with our new body we get it. We're in the right place at the right time. It's really interesting when you look at growth and development too, and I think it's an excellent area for coaches to do continued research and to take a look at it, because we tend to have biannual traits as we're growing with height and weight. So our height might grow, our limbs might grow during one season, then we get heavier the next season, then we might grow, we might not, and we might get heavier the next. So it keeps going back and forth, it fluctuates, it's not linear. So we need to constantly be aware of that And it's one of the pluses, I think, of the Canadian model when they're asking us to really look at and try to track when our athletes hit peak height velocity. The trouble with it, of course, is that unless you're with those athletes all the way through growth and development, who's tracking it? So I think we need to come up with a really good system for how we as coaches will work together within our programs to make sure we're adequately tracking our height of our kids as they're coming through, so we know when they're hitting these phases, because there is some really good research about certain things that they can do certain periods of time after peak height velocity. But unfortunately, most of that is not getting measured, so at best it's guesswork, and sometimes we figure, well, by the time you've reached maturity, once you've hit adolescence, you must be okay, right? But it's not necessarily so, because when you look at the World Health Organization's definition of adolescence, it could occur anywhere between the ages of 10 and 19. That's a huge range. So when we're talking about working with our kids, yeah, their kids from now could be anywhere between 6 to 10 to 14, depending on how you develop. Some kids are actually reaching maturity faster, and some kids are slower. So it's somewhere along that process, so we really need to track that correctly for our kids. The second pillar we have is actually long-term athletic development should be for all kids. We're not reserving it specifically for those athletes as we have defined them in the past, those who happen to do well earlier in the stages. It should be for everybody. So we need to make sure we're allowing everybody the opportunity to what they usually refer to as having a level playing field. So every kid should have an opportunity to perform. It goes back to the developmental assets. A lot of times you'll have to involve the community, the school, the parents, and there's been a push in coaching called dealing with parents. It's really the wrong way to look at it. In my environment, we never saw parents. We were always trying to get parents to come, because usually when our contests were being held was when parents were working or they weren't really interested. We changed a lot of our schedules so that we were actually having competitions on Saturdays when parents could show up. We would have festivals, round robins, etc. So there would be some period of time where parents could come and see their kids play. And that's important. We need to engage everybody in the process to move forward with this. It's not just one or the other. We really have to work together. The third one is actually the kids need to be encouraged to enhance their physical fitness by focusing on motor skills and muscle strength. So probably no surprise there with NSCA, we really do think muscle strength is very important. There's always that chicken and egg conversation. What comes first, muscle strength or motor skills? And the answer is yes. So for some of us, it's the muscle strength that helps us to perform better. So if you look at people doing lunges, for example, if you don't have the muscle strength in order to do a lunge in line properly, it's not going to happen. And if you don't have the motor skills to move in that particular pattern, no matter how strong you are, it's not going to look good. So we need to work on both of them together all the way through the developmental continuum. You know, I half jokingly said that I work with kids between the ages of 8 and 88. Even for my adult people that I work with, you still have to go back and focus on those skills. A lot of times adults never got that motor skill training either. So a lot of adults are athletes in some realm or another, whether they're out golfing, playing tennis, jogging, whatever it is they like to do. We can still be helpful in putting them into proper movement patterns to be able to do that. Okay, the fourth one of our 10 pillars is early sampling, which goes along with John Cote's developmental model that he came up with more from a psychosocial perspective. His LTAD model stood out a little bit from some of the others because he did have a sampling phase. So we did come up with a program that's known as the Composite Youth Development Model. You could look that up and see what that is. And we had different tracks for boys and for girls because boys and girls do tend to develop a little bit differently. Boys do tend to lag behind girls developmentally. So rather than focus on specific skill attainment in the different fitness attributes, however, we focused on all fitness attributes all throughout childhood and adolescence. There are certain periods of time where you might focus on one or two of those more than the others, but we didn't focus on one or two at expense of the others. Some other models might have you focusing only on speed, for example, at certain times. That's called a window of opportunity. There's debated research on windows of opportunity, mostly because of that biological variance. So if you said you have a window of opportunity between the ages of 7 and 9, and then again between 11 and 13, if you go back and put that 2-year window on either side, now you have those opportunities for speed between the ages of 5 and 15. That's essentially running you all the way through childhood and adolescence. So we're saying you should be able to develop all of those attributes across childhood and adolescence, but there are periods of time that you'll focus on some more than others. So fundamental motor skills need to always be focused on. Specific sports skills need to be focused on. Mobility, agility, speed, power, strength. There is actually time when you can focus more on hypertrophy. and then endurance and metabolic conditioning. Unlike a lot of programs where they're focusing on an adult model, we always say that kids are not miniature adults. However, we kind of impose that value system on our kids as they come up, especially through physical education, to focus on health-related fitness variables only. For those who don't remember their health fitness and skills fitness attributes, health fitness would be cardiorespiratory endurance, muscle strength, flexibility, and body composition. So by focusing only on those aspects, we're not really giving our kids the opportunity to work on our skills fitness that we've all recognized are important for long-term athletic development and for sports skill development as well. So we need to focus on the sports skills as well, which is also known as skills fitness, which is agility, balance, coordination, power, and speed. So when we're working on those, some of the lists actually include reaction time. There's debatable research on reaction time. We really look at reactive ability, and reactive ability is better trained when we look at it from a perspective of having that field sense we talked about, which is another reason why it's really important to make sure that our kids are engaged in different sport activities. I trained a bunch of swimmers for a period of time. They were elite level high school swimmers. And what we ended up doing with them is to improve their ability to be more functional. We would have them do other sports and activities as part of either their warm-up or their cool-down or during an unload period. So there are lots of ways of putting this together as coaches to actually move forward to make sure our kids are getting what they need. Okay, so the first thing we want to go back and remember is that the health and well-being of the kid, of our youth, is probably the most important thing. So any of the athletes under our control, we need to make sure that they're maintaining their fitness levels all the way through. And we also need to make sure that their participation isn't increasing the risk of injury. So when we're overplaying our kids, and a lot of sports have come up with guidelines that we should be following. So rather than looking for ways around those guidelines, U.S. Lacrosse has some really good research on guidelines that they use as well, basically saying that the amount of practice and competition per week for a youth is roughly equal to his or her age. So if you're 13 years old, you probably shouldn't be spending any more than 13 hours a week in practice and competition. So it's a good gauge to look at to make sure that our kids aren't doing too much, to make sure that we're on the right track. The other thing is that we need to assess where we are at any given point in time. So we want to make sure that our assessment, and assessment is really just, it's a tool. It's a snapshot of that particular point in time. We can't use that snapshot to say, all right, I see my 7th grader has a pretty good vertical jump. Let's call the pros and make sure we get that contract today, right? But that's what happens in our world. We think that all of a sudden this kid is a superstar. If we go back to our earlier definition as an early maturer, this athlete, that might be near the peak of their vertical jump ability. And then if a year or two later, we hope it doesn't happen, but if they have a season-ending ACL injury, for example, we may have peaked that athlete too early and done him or her a disservice. So we want to make sure that we look at it as our testing and assessment should be a snapshot of where we are, of where we can go to help each athlete become better as an athlete. And that's the important thing to think of there too. All right, the last two is there should be a systematic progression of what we do. That's one of the key things that LTAD provides for us. So no matter what level you work at, you can work through that continuum to get to the level where you need to be. And I think it's really important for coaches at different levels. In the U.S., the way we base it off of a school system, there are certain rules within different states of what coaches can do and can't do in terms of talking to one another about athletes coming through. But if you come up with a long-term athletic development process to be able to do that, if any of you know Gary Schofield down in Georgia, he's done an outstanding job at the school where he is of putting together a program for all of the kids that he works with. So all the way through the entire scholastic process, they have a nice systematic progression for all of the kids to go through. And he's linked it back to the administration in academic terms that they can understand. So it's an important way to look at it. Internationally, if you're the U12 coach, you need to also be talking to the U6 coach and to the U18 coach to make sure that the progressions are matching and you get a really good idea of where the kids are at each phase, rather than assuming that they should be at a particular phase just because they happen to be U12. It doesn't always work that way. The last one that we really think is important, we put it last, but qualified supervision is one way it was looked at in the position statement NSCA did a few years back in 2009 on resistance training. But you really need to have qualified personnel working with our kids. In a lot of other nations, they have their premier coaches working at the youngest level, where kids need to be obtaining skills, mastering skills, being ready to move to that next level. The U.S. system is kind of a little upside down from that, whereas we have a lot of our best coaches at the professional level, when they're already elite athletes. So we need to have some system where we make sure that at least there's a minimum basis of understanding of the important things that we need to know about childhood growth and development patterns, how kids develop, how kids interact with one another, etc., to make sure that our coaches can be the best they can possibly be. So it's another thing that as coaches we can certainly take a look at. Do we know enough about pediatric exercise science? And pediatrics goes all the way through high school and college, by the way. So just because you're not working with 10-year-olds doesn't mean that it doesn't apply. So we need to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Okay, time to conclude. See where we are, see what's next. What do you have, Hewitt?
So I couple questions from folks in the live chat here. We will be at the PowerPoint. And hey, a little bit of echo here. Rick, maybe someone, maybe Rick, put the mute on. That might get rid of the echo.
Is my echo?
You're not echoing, but I think I'm echoing.
Actually, yeah, you are.
Oh, you know what? It's all good now. Hey, everyone, we will email out the PowerPoint. We will email out the links that Rick is referencing, and there will also be a recording available of this presentation immediately available after this, which you can share with your friends and colleagues, because I know you want to do that.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, and look, Rick is on Twitter. Rick is more active on Facebook. Rick, go ahead and share with everyone the Facebook group that you're a part of in case no one knows about this, because it's a really vibrant group on Facebook.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Actually, there are a couple groups I'm involved in because I said, you know, this long-term athletic development approach really does go all the way through the developmental process. So there's a Facebook group for youth. So if you go to Facebook and you type in NSCA Youth SIG, that particular group will come up. There's also a special interest group for high school that I'm a part of. I do more posting probably in the youth special interest group than I do in the high school. There are a lot of leaders in the high school field. They're doing great postings there. There's also college coaches special interest group if you work within that realm. Brian Mann runs that one, puts up a lot of really great information. And then Robert Linkle runs the personal trainers special interest group. And a lot of times personal trainers, you know, whether coaches like it or not, it just happens to be a fact of life that sometimes personal trainers are working with athletes. So I think it's important that we all need to work together to make sure that whether we're getting an athlete who's been with a personal trainer or not, that everybody knows that we're all on the same page with this long-term athletic development process and doing the right thing. So those are all great opportunities to get up to. They're usually closed groups, but if you go on and ask to be invited in, we'll put you on.
And I love the groups. I'm a part of each one of them, and it's really a great way to kind of see what the topics are that people are interested in.
Right.
You know, it's a great way to get a pulse on the community and what topics are gaining traction. So that's fantastic. And look, everyone, don't worry. We're going to get you this information and anything else you'd like here. We're going to finish up here by saying, you know, become a better coach. Obviously, you've done that already by attending this presentation and being a part of this. I mean, continuing education is a massive part of the strength and conditioning community because it is a growing industry. More schools nowadays are getting strength and conditioning coaches than ever before. Budgets are getting bigger, so the field is growing, and with that, education needs to grow as well. As you heard Rick say in the beginning, we've had long-term models that have not been sufficient so far, so this is certainly a topic that will have to get worked on, and obviously, Rick is doing that for us. So before you leave today, please make sure to visit strengthperformance.com. That is the website for SP Network. It is the #1 community for strength coaches as far as strength conditioning content. So create an account and find out about all the job postings, about who's going where, and you can find out about all the content being shared as far as videos and drills and things like that. Really a rich community. And then also feel free to join TeamBuildr as well. We have a free trial, and at the least you can give that a shot and see if you're interested in it, or if you want to just kind of get familiar with the technologies out there for strength coaches. It's a great way to kind of get up to speed on what's happening as far as alternatives for Excel for programming exercises and workouts. And that's going to wrap up our webinar today. Rick, I know you said you're active on Facebook, so people can probably see you there. On Twitter as well. A lot of the coaches here are on Twitter because I've been live tweeting and I can see them interacting. You do have a Twitter account. You want to go ahead and share that with our folks here?
Yeah, and I guess I get kudos. I wasn't tweeting while I was talking, so that was a good thing, right? So my Twitter account is @RIHoward41. I wasn't smart enough to figure out how to do it outside of my email account, so it's @RIHoward41, which is also how you can find me on Facebook.
Okay, good. And I would type that into the chat there so everyone can see it. And then I also typed in the Twitter accounts for SP Network as well, because Twitter is a big platform as well for the strength coaches. We all know that. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Again, the presentation will be available as a recording, and we will send out an email with the rest of this information. We want to thank everyone for joining us today. It's been fantastic. And if you're going to any NSCA clinics in the Northeast or NSCA conferences, more than likely you'll see Rick there, and you will see us there, and you will see SP Network there. So we can't wait to get that going. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and have a great weekend. And we'll see you around. Bye-bye.
Thank you.